Hello, boys and girls. So today we're continuing our data lesson and unit on how we can represent data. And we are talking about how to read pictographs and bar graphs today. And so both of those you are familiar with. In third grade, reading them gets a little bit more difficult, and the questions that are asked about them can get a little bit difficult. But what's nice is that you are familiar with the way data is represented on both pictographs and bar graphs. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and get started. On 853 and 854 is what I'm looking at right now, and we are going to talk about the first part of this assignment, and then you're going to do most of it on your own. So as we're looking at the very top page, it specifically is showing a bar graph. And so what I want you to remember about a bar graph is that in third grade, each line does not necessarily have a number associated with it. You have to figure what each unit of measure is. So in this case, it says on this graph, each grid line represents 1 unit, but only every other grid line is labeled 0, 2, 4, and so on. So for example, the line halfway between 4 and 6 is 5. And so you have a 0 and it goes to 2. And so the line in between 0 and 2 is 1. And the line between 2 and 4 is 3. So you have to be super careful how that is the unit of measure is, okay? So the thing that I ask you to do for graphs and charts is to label it. If you remember everything that we've talked about, we've labeled our dot plots, we've labeled all of our graphs and charts. So on a bar graph, we are going to label our data. And so that when we are asked questions about it, we have our numbers handy. So on here it says this is hockey goals scored by players. Again, remember we look at our unit, the number of goals and how they're listed and how they're labeled. And then this is the name of the player. So Alex scored not 8, not 10, but the line in between 8 and 10, which would be 9. And so I'm going to label that 9. Okay. On Cindy, we're going here and we are going, it's the line between 6 and 8. It's right in between. And so that number is 7. Jack is right at 4. And Reggie is right at 8. So when we go back and we are asked questions about that data, we have the answers right there. We don't have to keep looking. We have it right in front of us. So on number 1, it says explain how to find how many more goals Alex scored than Cindy. We don't have to explain that. I'm not going to have you explain, but how many more is a clue word for subtraction. And so we want to know Alex and Cindy. Well, Alex has 9 and Cindy has 7. Whoops. How many more does Alex have than Cindy? So we would come up here. And we would say 9 minus 7. Remember, because our big number's on top, how many more? 9 minus 7 is 2. So Alex has 2 more than Cindy. Okay. Then it says, how many goals in all did Alex and Reggie score? So our question here is Alex and Reggie. So we're going to do what with those? We are going to add. Okay, how many in all is a clue word for adding, okay, or multiplying. In this case, Alex had 9 and Reggie had 8. So when we add those together, we get 17. So how many goals did they have in all? 17 goals. Okay. On the others, I'm not going to work them with you, but I am going to help you label and just listen to some of the things that I have to say and make your notes on your paper. Okay? The first thing we do, guys, this is a pictograph, and you know that from second grade, even first grade, you've learned about pictographs. It's where the data is represented by pictures. Now, the thing about a pictograph is there is a key, like you might have on a map. Okay, each symbol doesn't always represent one. In third grade, it almost always doesn't. Okay, it's telling us here that each light bulb equals 10 hours, and each half of a light bulb equals 5 hours, which would make sense that half of 10 is 5. If you cut 10 in half, you get 5. So we would have to figure out how many light bulbs, and we're going to label this pictograph before we even look at the questions. Okay, so for example, on the exercise room, this is the number of hours the lights are on each week. Well, in the exercise room, it's going to be, each light bulb is 10, remember. So this is going to be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and a half would be 5. So we are going to label that 75. Okay, and you're going to label each of these all of this data, you're going to label it on your pictograph, so you have these numbers to answer these questions. Okay, so which area has lights on for the most hours each week? Which area has lights on for exactly 50 hours each week? And in 1 week, how many more hours are the lights on in the exercise room than the swimming pool? Remember, how many more means subtract. So we are looking at the lights on in the exercise room than the lights on at the swimming pool. Okay, so you are going to answer these questions based on the data that you have in front of you. Again, make sure before you answer these questions, you label your pictograph. Okay, on the back, okay, you have a bar graph. How many units does each grid line on the graph represent? Well, again, before you answer these questions, you need to label your bar graph. And remember, the one tricky thing in third grade is every unit that's marked and labeled is not ever the same. In this case, you're skip counting by tens, but there's a line halfway between 0 and 10. So the line halfway between 0 and 10 would be 5. And the line halfway between 10 and 20 would be 15. So each unit, each line is counting by 5s, but but labeled by 10s. So you're going to answer your questions on that, but make sure you label. For instance, Cape Hunting Dog, you're going to label that 35 because here's where it falls in between the 30 and the 40, so it would be 35. Okay, and you're going to label all of your bar graphs and all of that data so you can have that information handy. Okay, 9 and 10 is using the football stadium, the football one, and that is a pictograph. So remember, each football is about 10,000 seats. So you are really skip counting by 10, but in thousands. So on this football, the very first one, each football is 10,000. So this would be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. So the Cowboy Stadium represents 90,000 seats. Remember, they're in thousands. So you need to remember that when you're answering your questions. Okay, label, label, label. If you can remember anything else about data, is label, because you have to take your time with your key and with your bar graphs to find out what unit of measure each unit represents. And if you can do that carefully, then the other stuff is stuff you've already learned. So just be careful about on a bar graph what you're skip counting by and what your each unit line is representing. And then on your pictograph, you have to circle your key and figure out what each picture represents. And that's really important in order to get these, to answer the questions correctly. Okay, guys, go ahead and finish that on your own, and you will be turning that into me. And I hope you don't have any questions, but if you do, you know where to find me. Have a great day.